Welcome back. Here's part 2 of WTF happened in nuclear energy.
Wow, that definitely complicates the nuclear is scary because of accidents kind of narrative that I think is very much alive in the popular perception of this energy source. The thing that keeps blowing my mind is the fossil fuel number. That is just still very much in my mind right now.
It's wild.
Okay.
It is, but people just don't know about it. It's sad.
We move on?
Yes.
Okay. Wow, accidents. These other two are, I think, less huge, but still important. One thing that we hear a lot about is waste. I saw a tweet recently from Greenpeace that was like, nuclear energy isn't viable for the future. The waste problem.
All right, dude. So Greenpeace, outright lying right here. No yellow barrels, none of that nasty green goop. Nuclear waste doesn't actually look like that. And it's, as I said in part 1, it is safely secured. The high-level waste is safely secured in dry cask storage, which is impenetrable. You'd never be able to even get near those drums. And the rest of it, we recycle or we store on site until it decays away.
Is still a thing, and that sort of sent me down this rabbit hole. The first thing I think of is Homer Simpson and green goop, nuclear waste that never, it's in a barrel somewhere and it can sneak out and destroy everyone.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
I know that is a caricatured version of it, but there is a reality that when we do fission, when we break apart atoms to make energy, there is a byproduct of that. In fact, I have a chart here. Actually, most of nuclear waste is not some scary material. The thing that scares people is actually this little 3%. It's the vast minority of what nuclear waste comes out of this process.
There you go, yeah, 90%. So that 90% right there with protective clothing, you do laundry. That is how you dispose of that. There's laundry machines, washing machines inside of a radiological controlled area. Intermediate level mentions reactor parts. There's also some fluids that you store on site at a nuclear power plant. Let it decay for a few days. Often refer to it as a waste holdup tank. You just hold it there, and then after it goes away, no more waste, then all you're left with is just water, and then you can discharge it out. And the high level, that's the part that you used dry cask for, the spent fuel. First you put that in a spent fuel pool, it cools down for several years. Another thing you do with the spent fuel pool is it's actually a way of recycling the fuel. Some of those assemblies are burned through multiple fuel cycles. And by cycle, I'm referring to an 18 to 24 month, usually, period where a reactor is operating, and then you change out the fuel, you refuel it. This used fuel, you just put it in a dry cask where, as I said in part 1, impervious to all weather effects. These massive things weigh upwards of 100 tons. They're really cool.
This is scary because this is stuff that comes out and gets put into big barrels, okay? And it gets stored on site, at the nuclear power plant.
They're not barrels. Barrel implies fragility and implies small and lack of robust, and someone could just steal it. Barrels is not an accurate statement.
Every year we make relatively not a ton of this stuff. It's about the size of half of an Olympic swimming pool. Okay, so it's not a ton relative to how much energy we get out of it, but
and some of it is reused within the same thing, so not all of it's going away. At the plant that I worked at, we have what's known as once burn and twice burn that you put back into the reactor to get more energy from it.
The thing that's scary is that this stuff doesn't go away. There's this really clunky chart that you don't really need to look at all the lines on. What you need to look at is that x-axis down here. You look down here and you just see really, really big numbers. This is how long this waste stays radioactive. And yes, you're looking at a number that says 1 million over here. Human beings have existed in this form for 200,000 years. And we're talking about creating a dangerous material that lives on potentially for hundreds of thousands of years, if not a million years before it becomes benign. That is
I could see where he's coming from. I could see the perspective of a layperson just not fully understanding that it's kept in a safe and secure location, that they would be afraid of that. Sure.
And this isn't just like in one facility. Like this isn't like all centralized in one place. Like if you look at this map of the U.S., this is where all of these sites are. Like there are a lot of them. So there's a lot of points of failure as time goes on.
There were more, sadly.
You can see how this could just build up and become like a...
Did he say lots of points of failure? No, that's the wrong way of looking at it. It is spread out so that there's actually less risk versus having it all in one site.
Passive management task.
No.
I have this very instinctive fear of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that helps is just to look at what it is. In my imagination, nuclear waste is green goop. Nuclear waste is actually a solid pellet. So we are trying to dispose of a solid material that is extremely radioactive. At most nuclear power plants, we have these, they're called dry casks. So basically, those fuel pellets that look like this go into a column inside a metal rod. It's just about half an inch across.
One misconception that a lot of people have is it's the uranium bit that's radioactive where the dose of concern is. While uranium is radioactive, it's a long time scale alpha particle. And by long time scale, we're talking billions of years. The fission products, isotopes such as cesium-137 and iodine-131, they're gamma sources. Those are the ones that actually emit a lot more radiation. You bring in new fuel that has not been fissioned at all to a nuclear plant, you can touch it. You're not going to get any dose. It's after it has already been used, and it's the fission products that are the source of the radiation.
And then all of those rods together are bundled into a fuel assembly. Then those are put inside of one of those big casks.
Yep, dry cask.
And then they're covered in concrete. There's an outer shell, there's a sealed inner cylinder. These things are built to withstand tornadoes and direct attacks and floods and every possible natural disaster that you can imagine.
Taking a hit from a train.
And they're certified for about 40 years. Obviously, that is nothing in the time.
We're talking upwards of 100 years. 40 years, I think they got that confused. A new nuclear power plant is licensed for 40 years, but new dry cast, we're talking 100 years.
Scale of radioactivity. People look at the difference between that time scale. They're like, oh my God, hundreds of thousands of years. That doesn't...
And one thing I will add, though, is you can extend that. Dry cask hasn't been around for that long. It's been around for 15, 20 years, something like that. So we don't really have the history compared to nuclear plants, but the plants themselves have had license extensions from 40 to 60 years. So there are, just because we don't operate in timelines of saying, oh, this dry cask is licensed for 1,000,000 years, just because that kind of messes with our imagination, it's probably going to last a lot longer than 100 years.
That there are lots of uncertified, unsafe dry casks all around the country. Like in the research that I was doing, I didn't find a single instance of a radiation leak from a dry cask, or a single instance of an attack on a.
Okay, she was talking about an instance of an incident associated with dry casks. That's no leaks. They've been transported. They've been stored on site, and this has been around for 15 plus years.
Deliberately meant to do harm.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there couldn't possibly be leaks, and it doesn't mean that there couldn't possibly be attacks. But just in terms of what we're really talking about here in risk assessment.
I think for me, I'm like, cool, it's only this big now.
Risk assessment 101, multiply consequences times probability. The consequences with nuclear stuff, especially, I did a lot of work with this. A lot of it's based on people's opinion. So there was a separate multiplier that was, there was the risk of actual damage and then risk of what people thought the damage is going to be that you multiply on top of that. And to give you a sense of things associated with nuclear, 1 in 1,000,000 chance of fuel damage is considered unacceptable risk. 1 in 10 million high, 1 in 100 million medium, and 1 in 1 billion is low. These are the numbers that we're talking about here when it comes to risk management. In what other industry do you have risk numbers that low?
But what's going to happen next in the long run?
Other countries are doing what's called deep geological storage.
Oh, whoa.
So what you, in theory, want to do is assemble those fuel pellets into those fuel rods, into those canisters, and the canisters are slightly different, but then you bury them deep underground. There are some countries that have already built systems like this.
That would keep them out of the way. The U.S. tried to do it with Yucca Mountain, but apparently the constituents of the area, no one really wants to put it in a certain spot, even though that would be the most geologically sound area within the United States for this purpose. But it doesn't really matter one way or the other in terms of waste being a problem, at least in my opinion. If you have a different one, let me know down in the comments. But the stuff is going to be secure one way or the other. It would be more convenient to have it all in one location.
As well. There are lots of countries that are investigating them. This is technology that is totally difficult and impressive that we can do, but it's being tried, it's being done. This is feasible. And in fact, if you go back to the chart that we were using, you might have heard of Yucca Mountain, which was the United States' effort to do deep geological repository. Yucca Mountain failed for lots and lots of reasons, some local politics, but again,
it's not in my backyard. It's that whole approach is why it failed.
It's a primarily political problem, not a technological one.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
that right there, what she just said right there, political problem versus a technological one, that is summed up the trials and tribulations that nuclear power has faced ever since the 3 Mile Island accident. It's the politics. Got to have the political will to do this. I'm all for let's build a bunch of those small modular reactors and have ourselves a clean, safe nuclear energy future. We can do this all over the world, but you just have to have the political will. Some countries do, some countries don't. It's a work in progress.
I feel this sense, and I think this is probably a pretty popular reaction to this, which is like, we have this like hot potato and we like need to get rid of it, so we put it in these casks that are only good for 40 years, and then it's like, that's gonna run out, so like...
Again, the 40 years, I don't know of any casks that are only been licensed for 40 years. The ones I'm used to working with are for 100 years.
Like bury it in a giant hole and like make it go away, but it's still going to be there. I think I kind of share the reticence of having an energy source that just continually produces this as a byproduct. Even if we do have these technologies, can you find a way to have it not have a byproduct, please?
Actually, not quite, but so think about this. This waste, the reason why the waste that we just talked about is scary is that it's radioactive, which means that there's energy in this solid.
Yep.
That's also...
Here's something I'll bring up. Other waste from other than nuclear, waste from, I said, like manufacturing processes and mines, like to make coal, to make the cadmium for your solar panels, you're going to be exposed to radioactive materials. They just don't measure it because they're not required to, because it's not a nuclear facility. If every other energy industry was required to measure radiation in all aspects of the value chain, that would flip this whole thing on its head.
A really exciting prospect, because there are ways that we can use that energy. And not only does that give us an energy source, it also allows us to shorten the radioactive lifespan of nuclear waste.
Of the waste.
Down from...
Yeah, let's reprocess. And those dry casks, they're going to have a heat source that lasts 1 million years. That's awesome. I know the Nuclear Regulatory Commission wouldn't go for it, but give me a couple of pipes, I can have it heat up the hot tub in my backyard. Never have to pay for a heater ever again. That's thinking outside the box, isn't it?
Potentially thousands of years to, if you do this enough, hundreds of years.
So you can use nuclear waste as fuel for more
You can
energy.
recycle nuclear
You
waste.
can recycle nuclear waste.
Yes. I dived all the way into this in a video that I'm now going to promise is going to be on my channel by the time you hear this one.
So it's live right now on your channel.
Yes.
You better be, because I just told
I'm
people.
promising that it is
Go to
right
Cleo's
now.
channel,
Maybe I should check that one out,
guide
too.
on nuclear recycling that I need to watch.
So here's the visual to just keep in mind. This is the way that the United States does this right now.
Okay, they mine it, it goes into uranium, they put it into a
Uranium,
reactor,
yeah.
and then it creates scary waste, and then they have to put it somewhere. Okay.
Exactly. It's a straight line. We don't reuse our nuclear waste.
Good high
but
level.
There are systems that are closed fuel cycles. So we have an open fuel cycle. It's one
Yep.
line.
Yep.
But there are closed fuel cycles where they're
Now, as for the why, the United States has had concerns, and again, ill-fated concerns, about the whole terrorists getting their hands on nuclear material when it's been reprocessed. That is wrong for a couple reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of steps that it takes from just getting spent fuel to being able to enrich it to being able to make a nuclear weapon. That is a huge, arduous process that I don't know, some terrorist probably doesn't going to have the resources to do. If you're a terrorist, you'd probably be better spending your resources on a bunch of conventional weapons, because that is a very expensive process. You can inflict a lot more terror a lot cheaper. And the other bit of that is there's the The second problem associated with that is so many other countries, including France and Russia, already recycle their fuel. So, and it's like if the terrorists are going to go there anyways, that I'm just, not that they would, but using that same logic, it doesn't work there either. So, there you have it.
different kinds of reactors can actually recycle nuclear waste so that you're getting more energy out of the nuclear fuel
Yep.
itself and also cutting down on the radioactivity.
God, that seems like a game changer.
And just for all the people out there right now who are saying that seems totally infeasible, Japan already does it.
Whoa.
This is a much too
Japan,
complicated
too.
visualization of Japan's nuclear fuel cycle, but they've been recycling nuclear fuel for years.
Oh, yeah, this is a huge game. If this could actually happen at scale, like if this could actually be applied, then you really...
It does, just not in the United States, unfortunately. It should, though. I agree.
Down on one of what I see and actually feel is like a major stumbling block for this energy source. That is a game changer.
Huge if true.
Huge if true. Nice.
Sorry.
I don't know what that was.
So accidents within waste, both of those are really associated with fear of bad things happening in the long run, especially. And the third one is like not that. Like the third one is just the plain old numbers. It's just cost. And this is actually like perhaps like the most cut and dry, which is that nuclear costs more than everything else. And it's gone up over time. Like, meanwhile, you've got this yellow line, which is solar, and it's just like, there's been so much investment, there's been so much innovation in this. Zip down, look at that.
Beautiful.
That's like, we've gotten so good at making solar cheap, and it's obviously been invested in by the government, but like, nuclear is expensive, and that's a problem.
Is this worth it? Is the conversation that we should all be having.
Yeah.
And not from a place of fear, but from a
So I bet this chart, I've seen charts like this before, does not take small modular reactors into account. And we're not looking at discounted net future worth after your initial fixed cost investment. Because the operating costs are a lot less expensive.
of evaluating what the best bang for our buck is to stop using fossil fuels and use clean energy sources.
Yeah.
And if that's not nuclear, and if we have better solutions in renewables, awesome.
Yeah,
Like that's great.
totally.
But it has to be
My 2 cents, we need both. Because nuclear has advantages in having it be at scale, so more of a mass production, economy of scale, and it's good base load power. Wind and solar are too intermittent. They're not going to carry the grid because it only blows wind at night and then solar during the day. That's going to create a bit of an imbalance. You're not going to be able to sustain that base load without something like nuclear. or coal. Coal would be your alternative, but coal sucks for a whole mess of reasons because it's so pollutant. It takes years off our lives. Let's make nuclear plants instead of coal, and then we can add solar and wind for our buildup load. More of a demand load follow sort of scheme when you have your grid set up.
Based on what's best for us, not based on calling out one specific energy source and creating an environment of fear around it without context.
Absolutely.
The question, like you mentioned, is always how much do we actually invest in creating these energy sources and causing this innovation and causing this price decline. This chart shows government subsidies for various kinds of energy. You got fossil fuels in blue, you got renewable energy in yellow, you got nuclear.
Yeah. Wind wouldn't make any money without the production tax credit. It just wouldn't.
Very small in green. And you can see, obviously, that we're investing more and more in renewables, which is awesome. The question that we have to ask about this chart is, how does it compare to the amount of energy that we get from each of these sources? Because if this perfectly lines up, then it's just dollar for dollar investing. The answer is, when you compare how much we're investing in each kind of energy versus the amount of energy that that source actually gives us right now, what you see is that nuclear is a little bit less than renewables these days in terms of our full energy mix.
Let's see. So here's a problem statement that I've seen often with these renewable. So renewable energy, this is misleading with this green curve. Biomass, this 43% of renewables is not environmentally friendly at all. It doesn't produce as much as coal, but you're basically just setting a bunch of wood on fire and letting it hit the atmosphere is the equivalent of what you're doing. So nuclear has a bigger chunk of actually environmentally friendly, carbon-free electricity that we're talking about right here.
It's getting invested in way less.
Which, why is that? Is it because of the fear? Like, it's probably because of these, like, big concerns that we've talked about.
I think we're now in a
shame.
situation where we're operating a lot of old...
An even playing field, nuclear would win the cost game. If you look at levelized cost and you throw in subsidies, nuclear would absolutely win. It's the better technology, especially with small modular reactors to supplement the larger reactors.
Nuclear power plants that are no longer competitive with the new sources of energy that we've been investing in. And those new sources of energy are amazing. Like, that's great. But we did strangle a potential clean energy source in a lot of ways. And so I'm not totally sure, to be honest, whether the fact that nuclear isn't competitive is because of a loss of innovation and investment that could have happened years ago, or because it was never going to be renewables. And kind of at this point, it doesn't.
It's horrible. A loss of innovation in terms of money, but also in terms of personnel. There was a major gap. We talked about the 70s was this big time. All those people are either retired or gone now. Now you have the gap of essentially people around my age. I'm in my early 30s, and we didn't have that many teachers to really have us crank out these massive facilities. We can relearn it. We're willing to do so. We're just gonna need a little bit of help, and yeah, that's one big potential cost that wasn't initially. That's probably not going to be shown on any of these graphs.
We are where we are.
Yeah.
I think that at the very least, I would hope that we're evaluating this based on the technology's ability to help us, as opposed to based on a lot of fear-mongering over decades.
Yeah, and I think what I found is that the fear and the concerns are really kind of sticky. You can't make an HBO miniseries about, like, an accident at a solar farm. I think after talking to you about this, I feel...
I second that. It's HBO's fault.
like there's a lot more to the story that, if invested in, if looked into, has a lot of potential. And that potential maybe hasn't been able to be fully realized. I don't know if this wins out in the long run, but I think it needs a fairer shot than it's been given.
It's not a matter of winning or losing. It's a matter of being part of our mix. And it'll give us that diversification that renewables just cannot handle by themselves. And it's better than coal and gas.
That's my takeaway.
For me, I'm going to watch this really closely in coming years to see if, like, this turns around and like we actually do check our fears and realize that
do it.
there is promise in this energy. And
Let's change the world right now.
Don't have another choice. We have to figure it out.
And because we're so wrapped up in our fears about nuclear power, we didn't even talk about innovation in nuclear energy, new kinds of nuclear reactors, new kinds of fuels that we might use. There's an enormous...
You want to know the true cost of accidents like Fukushima and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island? It's all of this is the consequence. Us not using nuclear for all these decades that we could have. If that public opinion never got swayed that way, can you imagine where we'd be at right now? What do you think about that in the comments? How advanced would our nuclear technology be right now? We'd probably have fusion.
Part of this conversation, it's like we can talk about nuclear as it exists today, we can also talk about the future. And that's something that I'm really excited to do. I think you can only do that, frankly, after you begin to unpack this part. And so what I loved about this is like, it felt like you were bringing the concerns that very reasonable people have about nuclear energy, but then we were able to talk about the context around each of those. Because the ultimate question when we talk about energy sources is always compared to what?
Yeah.
Deaths from nuclear accidents, in my opinion, should always be compared to deaths from other energy sources.
Yeah.
Radiation should always be compared to radiation from other
Compare it and levelize it so it's apples to apples.
sources. Investment in X should always be compared to investment in Y. And so I think when we are talking about how we get energy in the future, I think this conversation has to be compared to what? What kind of future do we want to have and how do we get there?
Yeah.
Hi, Homer, what gives?
Your Brendan making you eat all these crumbs of toxic waste.
Jeez, that's rough. There must be 200-300 gallons.
Nice on some Simpsons to liven that up. Well, that about wraps it up. I like this. I like their going straight at it. To laypersons, so it's unbiased if you're tired of listening to me with my obvious bias for nuclear. But I like their approach on this. It really adds fuel to me too. This sort of stuff really gets me riled up, and it's like, let's change it, let's educate, let's bring nuclear back. You can help me bring nuclear back by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.